If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to MINDSHOCK True Crime. This is your host, Bruce McGuire. You are listening to the Stephen Avery series. This is episode 32, Christine Rudy. And here is yet another murder victim with possible connections to Teresa Halbach. If you haven't checked out the previous MINDSHOCK episodes in the Stephen Avery series, particularly the Carmen Boutwell episode, make sure you check that out. That's episode 21 for possible connections to the Teresa Halbach case and a mountain of coincidences that the so-called guilters, the coincidence theorists, all sweep under the rug and pretend don't exist. In this episode, which will potentially be the most mind-shocking Stephen Avery episode yet, we will take a look at the gross incompetence and or corruption. I'm not going to pretend to know which one it is in which instance, because there's just so much of both. It's hard to tell. Is just astounding. Absolutely astounding. As always, if you enjoyed the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications. And make sure you allow your device to have those notifications come through. Or you can just go to youtube.com/mindshock to see all the latest episodes and videos on the most mind-shocking true crime cases, the paranormal, and conspiratorial topics, all examined in typical MINDSHOCK fashion with logic and reason at the forefront. If you like this particular episode, hit that like button, share it across social media platforms, keep the awareness up for the wrongly convicted and for corruption within the injustice system that runs rampant. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, or debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. You can also check us out on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. And patrons do get priority for case topic logical analysis co-podcaster requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast. All right, so first of all, for those who do not know who Christine Rudy is, I will go over her tragic account. This is a woman who was killed just 12 days after Teresa Halbach is reported missing, 9 days after Carmen Boutwell is found dead. So this is from the Wisconsin Domestic Violence Homicide Report 2005. It was published in September 2007. Very, very tragic at how extensive this report is and how many victims there are. Just very, very tragic. November 12th, 2005, Christine Rudy, 21 years old. Christine Rudy was shot to death and dismembered by her husband of 3 months, Sean Rudy, 23. Christine was 6 months pregnant at the time, and her unborn son, whom she had named Christopher, also died. 2 days after killing her, he reported her missing. Immediately prior to the homicide, Christine was in a car with Sean and an 18-year-old woman described as Sean's girlfriend. According to Sean and the second woman, all three had been using methamphetamine. Sean ordered Christine out of the car and drove away, then returned to where she was standing. He said, "Wife, till death do us part," and then shot Christine in the head using a 12-gauge shotgun stolen 2 days earlier when the three of them had burglarized a house in Iowa. Sean threatened his girlfriend that he would kill her too if she told anyone what he had done. Together, they drove to Sean's mother's home where Sean dismembered Christine's body. A day or two later, they dropped her remains into the Chippewa River, where they were discovered in March 2006 on the basis of information from Sean's girlfriend. 2 days before the murder, Sean left Christine on the side of a road in southern Wisconsin. After walking through the night for 7 to 12 miles, Christine reached a church in Fenimore, Wisconsin, where she waited until Sean picked her up that afternoon. Sean told a cellmate that he and his girlfriend had thought of many ways to kill Christine so they could be alone. Man, why didn't they just leave her alone and go away and be alone? Terrible. Before he was sentenced, he told pre-sentence investigators that he would not change anything, and he felt he did the right thing by killing Christine so that she would not give birth to a child that would possibly be disabled because of her methamphetamine use. Possibly. As part of a plea bargain in her cooperation with investigators, charges against Sean's girlfriend of aiding a felon and falsifying information as a party to a crime were deferred. She pled guilty to resisting or obstructing an officer and was sentenced to 271 days in jail. Sean Rudy pled no contest to the charges of first-degree intentional homicide of an unborn child, and mutilating a corpse. He was sentenced to 2 life sentences without parole for the homicide charges and 13 years and 6 months in prison and 5 years of extended supervision for the mutilation charge. So this is an incredibly gruesome and tragic, senseless crime. But again, if he was hopped up on that much methamphetamines, I mean, I don't know. It's thinking clearly is probably difficult to do in such a state. Now, the reason her case is curious in relation to the Hallback case is because some researchers believe that Teresa's remains are not Carmen Boutwell's, but Christine Rudy's. Now, what's really curious, among a lot of other things, are the comparisons between Christine Rudy's death and Teresa Hallback's death. Now, there's a lot of confusion here because apparently there was evidence that there was some charred remains at Christopher Rudy's parents' home in their burn pit. Does that sound familiar? However, according to the account, she was chopped up and tossed in the river. So it doesn't make a lot of sense, and in typical Manitowoc fashion, there's not a lot of definitive information regarding this. Rubber Ducky, one of the top researchers in the Stephen Avery case, has actually compiled a chart here of similarities between Christine and Teresa. They were both between 21 and 25. They were both shot in the head, allegedly. Both their bodies were dismembered. There were saw and cut marks on their bones. Their bodies were burned, body parts in multiple locations, electronics recovered from burn barrel or burn pit, lived on the east side of Wisconsin. They were traveling at the time of their death, murdered within 12 days of each other, DNA identification made from pap smears. Dr. Eisenberg was the bone expert, and the autopsy was performed by the same doctor, Michael Steer. So, a lot of coincidences here, and a lot that doesn't make sense in terms of establishing timelines and such. Now, here is a post from TikTok Manitowoc, again, one of the best subreddits on the case, unlike the main controlled Making a Murderer subreddit. I believe Teresa Hallback's body has not been found yet. This was posted by MN Atty 2 years ago. I don't think we've talked much on TikTok Manitowoc about the possibility that Teresa Hallback's body has simply not been located yet. I'm guessing most people can't imagine this, but those people would not be from Minnesota. Minnesotans learned from the Jacob Wetterling case that no matter how determined their search efforts might be, it can still be virtually impossible to find a body that has been hidden or buried in a rural location. Wisconsin has 16 million acres of forested land, 11 million acres of farmland, 7 million acres covered by water, totaling 34 million rural acres. Similarly, Minnesota has 41 million rural acres of forest farmland and bodies of water. The Jacob Wetterling story could have just as easily taken place in Wisconsin as in Minnesota. 11-year-old Jacob was abducted and murdered in 1989, but his body was not found until the murderer confessed in 2017 and led authorities to the shallow grave. Jacob's body had been buried in a rural pasture only 30 miles from the Wetterlings' home. I mean, that's not that close. And close to where the killer resided. Even though the murderer was known to authorities from the beginning, it was still not enough information to even begin to know where to look. That's a little bit different than some more modern cases where you have a last known location. For 27 years, there were intense ongoing efforts to find Jacob. For a time, these organized searches became an annual event. Hundreds of volunteers would join to search again and again, year after year. I think many in Minnesota fiercely believed that Jacob's body was going to be found no matter what, and people were never going to give up hope. Each year, the search intensified rather than waning, and in between searches, plans were made to search even more thoroughly or with better information the next time. Sadly, though, it proved to be an impossible task to go over every inch of the rural landscape surrounding the site of Jacob's initial abduction. This reality was punctuated in 2017 when the killer confessed to Jacob's murder and led authorities to his grave. It was located in a pasture a short distance from where the killer had lived continuously since before Jacob's abduction. The killer detailed how he had buried Jacob so haphazardly that Jacob's body was soon exposed, and above ground, his bright red hockey jacket clearly visible. A year later, the killer moved Jacob's body across the road to a farm pasture. That is gruesome. Doug Voss, the owner of the farm where Jacob was ultimately found, stated that there's very little area of the farm that people aren't walking by. Nevertheless, Voss noted that the tall grass would make it nearly impossible to notice anyone coming or going, especially at night. I personally have always suspected Teresa Hallback's body just hasn't been found yet. Those few short days of organized search parties were nowhere near enough time for anything more than the most perfunctory search. Then, very quickly, Manitowoc authorities zeroed in on Avery as their only suspect, and they did so with a white-hot intensity that steamrolled over anyone's doubts. As most on TikTok Manitowoc realized, none of the evidence strongly supported claims that Teresa's remains had been found. A death certificate was issued months before DNA of tiny fragments of materials were ostensibly analyzed. It was as though investigators simply willed proof of her death into being out of their necessity to pin a murder on Avery. The DNA that was later claimed to have been present was extremely inconclusive, as noted by Kratz himself in his email to Culhane, where he mocked the public's gullibility. And I don't believe I have gone over this email. So here we go. This was February 7th, 2006, from Ken Kratz to Sherry Culhane. Very upstanding individuals, the two of them. So here's the email. Thanks so much for your quick response. Sounds like you've got everything handled. I spoke with Mark Weigert, and he mentioned he called about swabbing the trigger portion of the gun for DNA, then sending it off to the tool mark guys. Thanks for doing that. Thank you also for testing all the stains in the SUV. That will be a huge weapon against the claim of quoted planted evidence. The SDR PowerPoint I found is pretty basic, and I don't intend to go into a lot of the science of the DNA analysis for the jury. This is consistent with the way Norm does it. I still don't understand the two new markers, Penta E and D, what chromosomes are analyzed, inspected, associated with those loci. I'm sure you'll explain what 5 base pair repeats means at the necessary time, so we don't need to go into that now. Can you identify the 7 loci that matched on the tissue analysis? Most of what will be presented at trial will be computer-based exhibits, PowerPoint, so although we can develop charts and the like, we'll need to do that in a computer format, then just print out a small page to have marked as the actual exhibit for court. Mark Weigert is checking the 1985 Manitowoc blood match. It's amazing, however, how much weight the public attributed to that finding locally. That, quote, the FBI confirms that the human remains are that of the victims, end quote. We were careful not to say that at all, but perceptions are what they are. On that topic, didn't the RFLP testing use 7 loci for a, quote, match? I do not need your profiles generated on all the results. The way you did your last report is fine. Lumping all the profiles that were from each respective source together. Okay, he goes on about other people being excluded from DNA, etc., etc. But that was interesting. It's amazing, however, how much weight the public attributed to that finding locally. We were careful not to say that at all, that the human remains are that of the victims, but perceptions are what they are. Indeed, they are. Is that why he called the press conference to state that Avery was guilty before he even had a trial? I mean, obviously, this whole thing's a sham, but very, very curious nonetheless. Back to the Reddit post, many on TikTok Manitowoc have observed that whatever evidence was supposedly found of Teresa's presence at the Avery salvage yard, it was always the kind that could have been manufactured in the absence of locating her actual body. The crime scene itself never seemed real. Investigators didn't take pictures, they didn't allow a coroner to survey the scene, and they didn't use archaeological techniques to analyze the burn pit. They plowed with machinery over the site where Teresa's body had supposedly been found, something completely inconsistent with law enforcement's long-standing tradition of demonstrating only the greatest respect and reverence for the dead in such heartbreaking cases. And there never even appeared to be any heartbreak among those working the scene. No grief counselors were called in, and not a single employee needed time away from work to grieve. Everything about the crime scene came across as staged because those involved fell short in their efforts to approximate the trappings of a real crime scene, and most especially their own behavior was incomprehensibly uncaring. I've come to realize over the past 3 years that absolutely none of the evidence relied on as proof that Teresa's body had been found was ever believable. In particular, though, I would like to focus on Leslie Eisenberg's contribution to the case against Avery. We've analyzed in great detail many of the indications that evidence was planted and fabricated, but I don't think we've really gotten down to the nitty-gritty concerning Eisenberg. The bottom line is that Leslie Eisenberg was proven to be a bald-faced liar in another case during 2005 under very similar circumstances. Eisenberg was a forensic anthropologist with the Wisconsin State Crime Lab during 2005 and 2006. It was Eisenberg who gave her professional opinion that tiny bits of Teresa's charred skeletal remains had been found in Stephen Avery's burn pit. And I will remind all of the guilters and the coincidence theorists once again that cadaver dogs never hit on Avery's burn pit. Now, apparently they did hit on the Rudy burn pit, which is interesting. So that means he burned her body, he chopped it up, then burned it, then dumped it. It's hard to keep track of the Rudy case as well. But let's continue here. During this same period, Eisenberg also provided her professional opinion that a murder victim's unborn child's remains had been found in the defendant's burn pit in another Wisconsin case. Christine Rudy was murdered by her husband Sean on November 12, 2005. Christine's body was discovered in the Chippewa River March 29, 2006. Sean Rudy is now serving life in prison after being sentenced on August 4, 2006. An older TikTok Manitowoc opinion provides a detailed analysis of this case, and I will get into that next, but continuing here. The problem with the Rudy case is that Leslie Eisenberg fabricated evidence back in November of 2005 that was later proven to be absolutely false in March 2006. As in the Avery case, authorities were desperate to firm up their evidence against Sean Rudy. In both the Avery and the Rudy cases, Eisenberg brazenly lied in an effort to strengthen the state's position at trial, which turned out to not even be necessary because Rudy confessed. But again, is this a glimpse into the MO, the protocol of Corruptuoc and Wisconsin? Christine Rudy was 6 months pregnant at the time of her disappearance. Eisenberg proclaimed that she had identified the burnt remains of Christine Rudy's unborn child among the contents of Sean Rudy's burn pit shortly after the materials were collected on November 29, 2005. Eisenberg claimed she had found bones and even tissue from the fetus. She went further, stating that the killer had obviously separated the fetus from its mother, thereby explaining away the complete lack of evidence of Christine's remains. Eisenberg asserted that although Christine's body was missing, the baby had been found catching Sean Rudy practically red-handed and sealing his fate at trial. However, on March 29th, 2006, when Christine's body was finally found in the Chippewa River, the 6-month fetus was also found still attached and fully intact. There had been no tissue, no bones, absolutely no part of the unborn child ever there among the contents of Sean Rudy's burn pit. Eisenberg's story was completely fabricated. When you review Wisconsin media accounts of the Rudy case, Eisenberg's lies are never highlighted or even mentioned. But when we now look at the Rudy and Avery cases side by side, it's easy to see that Eisenberg was violating all kinds of norms and standards relating to evidence. I just can't emphasize enough that Leslie Eisenberg was fully aware that she was lying about the evidence in both the Rudy and the Avery cases, and probably also in other criminal cases during this time period. I mean, again, either it's gross incompetence or she's just lying about everything all the time and their MO is, oh, okay, there's bodies in the burn pit. I mean, how was the investigation, how was any kind of FBI investigation into the corruption in Manitowoc and the Wisconsin State Crime Lab and all these things? How did they not come up with anything? I mean, this is some brazen lying and corruption. Or at the very least, such gross incompetence. How are you concluding that this is a burned fetus, a burned unborn child when it's not? I mean, I don't know. How do the guilters explain this? How do the coincidence theorists explain any of this stuff? Or do they just pretend it doesn't exist? I guess that's easier. I mean, denial's a pretty good coping mechanism. Just last week, again, this was 2 years ago, Hennepin County, Minneapolis, and surrounding suburbs, authorities announced that they would be vacating guilty verdicts in 32 cases based on their discovery that an Eden Prairie police officer lied to obtain search warrants in a single case. Instead of doubling down on their wrongful convictions, the Hennepin County Attorney's Office chose to essentially free 10 guilty men rather than imprison one innocent man. Wow, that is very, very interesting. So is Hennepin County the only non-corrupt area in nearby Minnesota? Unlike Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Judiciary and the Wisconsin Attorney General's Office should look long and hard at this Hennepin County matter for guidance on how to proceed with remedying the wrongful convictions in both the Avery and Dassey cases. As it stands currently, Wisconsin authorities are still dealing with a slow-motion train wreck that continues to be witnessed by millions around the world. It remains a debacle that will never be over until those in power in Wisconsin come to their senses and finally make things right. So that's the post there. Obviously, they can't if that reveals corruption even beyond these cases, because if it was just about this case, they probably would have had some people that they just had become sacrificial lambs. But it seems like everybody's got dirt on everybody, and they're all complicit in not just these cases, but many other cases. And the corruption is so rampant, it's so many people are involved and have dirt on each other that they can't blow the whistle on each other. What's taken so long? So it's very interesting that Eisenberg is just flat out making stuff up. So worst case scenario, she's lying about everything and complicit in all this corruption. Best case scenario, morally for her, she's just the most incompetent buffoon and her testimony just has absolutely no validity. So why would you trust the testimony of somebody who's either been caught lying or just the gross incompetence of being unable to identify any kind of charred remains? So she's saying that some kind of charred remains which are not a fetus are actually a fetus and trying to convict someone based on that. This is the difference between science and scientism. For the coincidence theorists out there, for all those hopelessly indoctrinated into the cult of state and authority worship, those who cannot fathom that even people wearing costumes like police officers, even people within the court so-called justice system, prosecutors, attorney generals, they're capable of corruption or fallibility. And that needs to be highlighted 10 times over, because guilters and coincidence, they don't seem to grasp these very basic concepts that even small children can grasp. But for whatever reason, they continue to pretend that police and state officials are incorruptible or infallible. It's absolutely bizarre. It's really bizarre. Again, it's like I've said many times, it's like a common sense test for adults. It's very difficult to believe that there are actually functioning adults out there that are guilters who are not related to Manitowoc police or Wisconsin state officials. So going back to this theory, has Teresa Halbach's body actually been found? Now, the crux of the Rudy issue is that Rudy's remains and allegedly Teresa Halbach's remains were in the state crime lab at the same time. And when you have all of these untrustworthy individuals handling the remains, giving testimony on the remains, what do we have here? I mean, how many other cases has Eisenberg testified in? How many of those people are innocent, where she just made up information saying that these remains belong to these people when they don't, and convicting people on it? So one thing should become clear from all this, that let's say they're well-intentioned. I mean, obviously that's relatively dubious claim. But let's say Manitowoc and Wisconsin state officials as a whole are well-intentioned. This is their MO. Even if they have a guilty guy, which by all accounts, Rudy confessed, it seems like he did it. There was another witness. I mean, I haven't looked at the case closely, but it seems there was no trial. So this was all, he basically pled no contest, so it wasn't a full-blown, drawn-out trial. But it's interesting that they were willing, when there was no body, they were willing to make up evidence. That's the takeaway here. Wisconsin state officials, so-called law enforcement and justice system personnel, were willing to lie and completely fabricate evidence relating to a burn pit, no less. So now again, Stephen Avery was already framed by these same individuals when there wasn't $36 million on the line, when the ego stakes weren't this high, when he already didn't make them look bad and they were looking to get back at him, when they didn't have people coming out of retirement for the frame job. So this all adds fuel to the fire. The metaphorical fire. Not the legendary bonfire that supposedly never happened. If you haven't checked out the previous MindShock episodes, you could also check out the clip Legend of the Bonfire on the MindShock channel, where we go over the history of the fabricated bonfire. So what's the main issue here, again, is that we have precedent of lying and falsifying evidence. I'll repeat that again for the guilters. We have precedent, we have history of these same individuals lying and fabricating evidence, demonstrably proven false, not theoretically, demonstrably. What say the guilters? They seem to have been more and more silent this past year, as all of this corruption and incompetence is being brought to light by many astute researchers. And we shouldn't, again, be remiss and forget about Carmen Boutwell, because, again, the coincidence stack is quite high regarding her suspicious death and cremation and the individuals involved there. This is all happening at approximately the same time. So the time frame, it's very, very sketchy. It's sketchy. It's hard to dismiss this and just unless you're a guilter, to just stick your head in the sand and pretend all of these coincidences don't exist. I mean, you'd have to throw all logic and reason out the window and ignore absolutely all of this shady business. I mean, some people do not believe in coincidences, and even certain detectives in cases, I've read a lot about what they say. In any case, there might be one coincidence. that can't be explained due to missing information. That doesn't mean the official account is off, but there's just always at least one aspect that's unexplained. As soon as you add a second one, that's where they say that can't be a coincidence and it needs to be looked at. Now, we're already in dozens and dozens of coincidences in this case, so we've long surpassed one or two. So, of course, we now know, looking at all this information, that Eisenberg is a proven corrupt liar or simply the most incompetent anthropologist in the history of anthropology. So, how many there likely could be other cases we don't even know about where she just lied and fabricated evidence. There could be people sitting in prison innocent based on her fabrication, or possibly guilty but put in prison unlawfully because the evidence against them was manufactured or false. I think, again, everybody except the guilters agree that people deserve a fair trial, innocent or guilty. Again, that is the law of the land. Also interesting is to compare Eisenberg and the dental expert who the dental expert did not want to commit to identifying the remains, the dental remains, as Hallbacks, where it's interesting that Eisenberg did say they were Hallbacks. Does that give new meaning to put her in the garage? The statements made to put Teresa Hallback in Avery's garage, whether she was there or not, that's the narrative that Manitowoc wanted to fabricate, regardless of whether it was true or not. Here are two interesting posts in response. Excellent analysis. Even before learning about the Rudy case, I found Eisenberg less than credible. She was forced to walk back things under cross, which if she had been truthful, she wouldn't have had to do. I was blown away when we learned about the Rudy case. What little credibility she had evaporated. To me, this goes directly to her work and professional ethics. She doesn't have any. She was so deceitful in the Rudy case, holy hell. I think it was highly irresponsible for her not to do in-depth testing on what was delivered to her. I also take exception with Culhane using Eisenberg's photo of the tibia or whatever it was in her PowerPoint presentation. It was deceitful and manipulative in my opinion. While I believe Teresa's dead, I remain unconvinced by what the state presented. Everything you listed shows an extreme rush, where under normal circumstances it is unthinkable. Why would a DC be signed under such conditions? What was the rush in shoveling up this pit? Obviously, no one was buried and in need of emergency treatment, so why would Sturtevant completely disregard even the most basic policies? It isn't reasonable to me, that is, under a normal investigation, but if we look at other events like depositions and what has already been discovered, it becomes obvious to me. And quoting, it's easy to see that Eisenberg was violating all kinds of norms and standards relating to evidence. I just can't emphasize enough that Leslie Eisenberg was fully aware that she was lying about the evidence in both the Rudy and Avery cases, and probably also in other criminal cases during this same period. She sure as hell did. Despicable behavior. I also believe Culhane's is just as bad. While examining this alleged bullet fragment that allegedly contained the teeniest amount of nucleated cells, she expletive that test up. I don't believe her, and no one has ever explained why she didn't do a simple presumptive test. Excellent news that Hennepin County is taking responsibility and correcting the actions of criminal law enforcement. This is exactly what needs to happen. Thanks for sharing that story. I hadn't seen this. The response, really, if Eisenberg was operating in any other state, authorities would have done something about her obvious lies and probably perjury as well. In Minnesota, we have situations like this come up occasionally, and from what I've seen, they just cut out the cancer right then and there. It's a completely different approach from Wisconsin, but I believe the public here has a much higher level of confidence in our criminal justice system because of these policies. And in Wisconsin, Eisenberg represents a blaring example of what needs to be done but has not been done. Really bad call, I say. Both the law enforcement and the legal communities have the responsibility of policing themselves. It's how things are set up. It's part of the job. Wisconsin needs a good house cleaning of their crime labs from top to bottom. Put her in the garage My expletive. Here is an article from January 7th, 2016 from CBC.Canada. Making a Murderer. Sudbury forensic experts reflects on his testimony at the Stephen Avery trial. Dr. Scott Fairgrieve called as defense witness at Wisconsin's trial of the century. Dr. Scott Fairgrieve, head of forensic science at Laurentian University in Sudbury, testified at the high-profile murder trial of Wisconsin man Stephen Avery in 2007. That trial is now the subject of a sensationally popular true crime documentary on Netflix. I would like to think that the problems that they had with that evidence there couldn't happen here, says Fairgrieve. There's enough about Avery's case to raise some eyebrows. Fairgrieve, who is chair of forensic science at Sudbury's Laurentian University, said he was contacted by Stephen Avery's defense lawyers. Jerome Buting and Dean Strang asked Fairgrieve to review a forensic anthropology report from the site where charred human remains, those of Teresa Hallback, were recovered on Avery's property. The article should say allegedly, but it doesn't. And they said, it's quite a compelling case, said Fairgrieve. At the time, they said they wanted to. I'm not so much sure as it was warned me. But they let me know that this was Wisconsin's trial of the century. Fairgrieve said the trial was sensational with heavy media coverage every day of the proceedings. Avery, who stood accused of murder, had already made the front pages when after 18 years behind bars, he was exonerated for sexual assault he did not commit. Fairgrieve was called upon to sift through photographs and reports from the scene where Hallback's remains were found. The big question, was her body burned on Avery's property or was it burned somewhere else and then moved? On the stand, Fairgrieve characterized the way the prosecution questioned him at trial as something of a game of cat and mouse. They said, so you didn't actually see the remains, which is quite true. I saw all the photographs and all the documentation and everything that was disclosed by them, which is supposed to be a complete record. And I said, no, I didn't get a chance to go to the scene. The scene had been so destroyed by investigators by the time I would have been there, there was no point, said Fairgrieve. Ultimately, Fairgrieve said in his professional opinion, one could not conclude with perfect certainty that the remains had not been moved. As a forensic scientist, I'd say you're right to question this, he said of the defense team's assertion. I think there should have been a mistrial myself, said Fairgrieve. So it's interesting that in other regions, both in the U.S. and in Canada, people believe that this farce would have never be allowed. Ken Kratz's antics, Eisenberg's testimony, the complete lack of any actual concrete evidence or proof of chain of custody of any kind would result in a mistrial everywhere except Wisconsin. All right, so let's look at the documents from the 2005-2006 Rudy case, including Eisenberg's claims about the pit fragments. From a criminal complaint against Sean Rudy filed March 3, 2006 by complainant Richard Engelbretson of Clark County Sheriff's Department. Examination of burn pit. Your complainant further bases this complaint upon Wisconsin DOJ report number 05-1821/56 of Special Agent William Boswell concerning the burn pile examination, evidence recovery, and submission. A copy of said report is attached hereto and incorporated here in Exhibit 23. Said report indicated in pertinent part that Special Agent Boswell and Heimerl assisted Special Agent Eben on December 2nd, 2005, in the investigation of the disappearance of Christine M. Rudy in Clark County. Special Agent Eben had received information that Sean W. Rudy had recently burned several items in a large burn pile behind Sean's mother's home at redacted in Stanley, Wisconsin. As the burn pile was thawed out with a torpedo heater, investigators observed near the top of the burn pile a bone fragment that was approximately 2 inches in length. And now, here we go. Let's look at how this plays out. What's the MO here? So, a burn pit. Obviously, there was a fire in the burn pit at some point. Just like in the Avery case. I mean, he burned something a week prior or whatever it was, a week or two prior to Hallback's presence at the salvage yard. And yet, so-called investigators, so-called law enforcement, they twisted that. They turned that into Legend of the Bonfire. Who knows where this so-called information came from that Sean W. Rudy had recently burned several items in a large burn pile behind his mother's home. I mean, he probably burned something sometime, or at least somebody did. It's a burn pit. But what that has to do with this particular case, just like in the Avery case, is unknown because everything is fabricated. A digital photograph of the bone fragment was taken by the Clark County Sheriff's Department and emailed to forensic anthropologist Dr. Leslie Eisenberg. Dr. Eisenberg later returned a call and indicated that the fragment was indeed a bone, appeared to be human, and was similar in shape to a tibia bone. Similar. All items appeared that to be consistent in size, shape, and color to bone were removed and placed in a 6-quart plastic container. Special Agent Boswell took custody of all items collected from the burn pile examination. I mean, they seem to have a slightly better chain of custody here, but who knows where that bone originally came from. On December 4th, 2005, Special Agent Boswell met with forensic anthropologist Dr. Leslie Eisenberg at the Dane County Morgue. Dr. Eisenberg examined the remains that were suspected to be bone and identified several items that she believed to be human bone. Now, how competent is she? Attached hereto and incorporated herein as Exhibit 24 is a letter dated December 28, 2005 from Eisenberg to Clark County Sheriff Louis Rosendich regarding Clark County Sheriff's Department Case 05-9393/Christine Rudy Forensic Anthropological Analysis. In said letter, Dr. Eisenberg indicates she received 3 digital photographs sent by email to Sergeant Kent Wright of the Clark County Sheriff's Department on November 29, 2005. Additional photographs were forwarded on December 2nd, 2005. Dr. Eisenberg states, quote, "In both instances, I was able to confirm the presence of fragmentary human cranial bone of recent age," end quote. She was able to confirm, not theorize, not suggest the possibility of, but confirm. Dr. Eisenberg further states that she examined the burned fragmentary human remains transferred to her for analysis. She said she had identified the fragmentary burned remains of a human fetus along with fragments of adult human postcranial bone. Where did all these remains come from? Where were they planted from? Several of the adult fragments exhibited evidence of suspected cut marks. Attached hereto and incorporated herein as Exhibit 25 is a letter from Dr. Eisenberg to Clark County District Attorney Darwin Zweig under date of January 15, 2006. Said letter explains in greater detail the process by which Dr. Eisenberg arrived at her conclusions set forth in the letter to Sheriff Rosendich. Dr. Eisenberg states, "I think it is important to consider the mechanism by which the fetal remains, yet very few adult remains, made their way to the burn pile. It is possible that the fetus was deliberately removed and burned independently of the majority of the adult remains, given the shallow depth of the burn pile and the bigger representation of adult human bone from the context. I believe that another or other dump deposition locations may yield additional adult human bone human remains." So are they pretending that this is a similar situation in order to make it intentionally hard to nail down or hard to pin down exactly where all the remains are, because it's a lot harder to fabricate evidence of a complete human skeleton than it is just a few pieces here and there taken from who knows where? This is prior to the finding of remains by Highway MM. Your complainant further bases this complaint upon the report of your complainant, a copy of which attached hereto and incorporated herein as Exhibit 15. In pertinent part, said report indicates that your complainant began searching on the east side of Roger Creek Road at Highway MM on November 29, 2005 at approximately 8:35 that morning. Your complainant located what appeared to be human skull fragments. They were located on the west shoulder of the roadway, approximately 200 yards north of Highway MM. There were 2 pieces approximately 5 inches in length and approximately 2 inches in width. Your complainant also observed what he believed to be brain tissue in the ditch. Your complainant also looked at the roadway where the bone pieces were and observed a smaller piece of bone about a half an inch in diameter. To the west of the bone pieces, he observed what he believed to be brain matter. Additional brain matter and tissue were located in the ditch farther to the west. Pictures of some of the items observed by your complainant are attached hereto and incorporated herein as Exhibit 16. Wait, so this is all just made up nonsense. I mean, this is how they roll in Wisconsin. I mean, this is completely insane. This is mind-shocking. What are all these pieces of evidence that are being identified as bone fragments and brain matter? Are they actually such, taken from other victims from other cases? Or, I mean, were these dug up in graveyards? Or is this just complete nothingness and they're just saying that it is? And using pictures of other things? I mean, this is just absolutely insane. It's mind-shocking. Additional bone pieces were found. The Wisconsin State Crime Lab was contacted and their assistance in collecting the evidence was requested. Sergeant Kent Wright of the Clark County Sheriff's Department took digital photos of the bone fragments. A copy of Detective Kerry Kim's report dated December 12, 2005, which indicates that the activity was, quote, evidence processing, end quote, is attached hereto and incorporated herein as Exhibit 17. Said report indicates contact with your complainant and the discovery of the bone and tissue in various areas along Rogers Creek Road on the west shoulder, approximately 200 yards north of County Highway MM in Clark County, Wisconsin. A copy of a survey diagram showing the location of a human skull and bone fragments is attached hereto and incorporated herein as Exhibit 18. Said report indicates that one Gerald Cotajavaro and other members of the Wisconsin Crime Lab unit arrived on scene at approximately 12:30 and began photographing and processing the scene. Detective Kern collected items 16 and 17, which were identified as tissue matter. Mr. Kotajarvi from the crime lab turned over the 17 items of evidence to Detective Kern, and he transported them to the Clark County Sheriff's Department. At about 4:02 on November 29, 2005, Detective Kern placed the items 1 through 4, 6 to 17 in the freezer in Clark County Sheriff's Department evidence room. Item 5 was placed on shelf 206. None of the packages were opened by Detective Kern. I mean, this is slightly better chain of custody than the mix and match barrel switcheroos in the Avery case. This whole thing reminds me of those 90s board games. That anatomy board game, was it Operation or something? Did they just like take some plastic pieces of something and throw it, or something from like some anatomy skeleton in a biology classroom, and they just they just said that it was this and it was that, since obviously it had nothing to do with the Rudy case. It's so mind-shocking. Your complainant further bases this complaint upon the report of investigator Scott Haynes, indicating that on Friday, December 2nd, 2005, investigator Haynes and Detective Kern entered the Clark County evidence locker, collected items 1 through 17. A copy of said report is attached hereto and incorporated herein as Exhibit 19. Said items were placed in investigator Haynes' squad and then drove to the Marshfield Clinic. At the clinic, Detective Kern and investigator Haynes contacted Dr. George M. Rupp, who retrieved a slide with the name of Christine White on it. The slide was placed in blue holder and placed in a brown paper bag for investigator Haynes. Investigator Haynes sealed the bag with evidence tape, placed his initial on it, dated it, labeled it item 18. Item 18 was placed with the rest of evidence Detective Kern was monitoring. At that time, Detective Kern and investigator Haynes drove to the Madison, Wisconsin Crime Lab, unloaded all the evidence, turned the evidence over to the crime lab staff. Your complainant further bases this complaint on the report of Daniel J. Campbell, a crime lab analyst, indicating that among other items of evidence, the crime lab received a small piece of light pink and white colored apparent tissue-like material, as well as a pap smear reportedly from Christine M. Rudy. Reportedly from. The tissue-like material was identified as item AQ. The pap smear was identified as item AS. The analyst concluded as followed, quote, based on the DNA profile obtained from the pap smear, item AS, reportedly recovered from Christine M. Rudy, it is the opinion of this analyst to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty that Christine M. Rudy is the source of the DNA obtained from the apparent tissue-like material item AQ, end quote. A copy of the report and supplemental report, a report of Detective Kerry Kern dated January 2nd, 2006, indicated the collection of buccal swabs from Carol and Edward Lee, Christine's parents, a letter of transmittal dated January 30th, 2006, a transmittal of criminal evidence from along with a very short report from Detective Jeff Bumgarden dated January 13th, 2006, indicating that he received the copy. It is attached hereto and incorporated herein collectively as Exhibit 20. Your complainant further bases this complaint upon the contents of report number 05-1821/57 of Wisconsin Department of Justice, herein after DOJ, Division of Criminal Investigation with respect to skull fragments. Said report is attached hereto, incorporated herein, Exhibit 21. Said report indicates that in December of 2005, Special Agent William J. Boswell went to the Wisconsin State Crime Lab in Madison and retrieved the suspected skull fragments recovered from the investigation into the Christine Rudy disappearance. Special Agent Boswell took the items to pathologist Michael Steer. Said report indicates that Dr. Steer examined each item through the bags and with the assistance of the radiographic technician subjected each of the 6 items to an x-ray. At the completion of the examination, Dr. Steer concluded that, assuming that each skull fragment is human and that each piece came from the same individual, that individual would be deceased. A copy of Dr. Steer's autopsy report number W05-613F is attached hereto and incorporated herein, Exhibit 22. Special Agent Boswell returned the 6 items to the Wisconsin State Crime Lab on the same day. Edit. Exhibit 22, Dr. Steer's autopsy report signed January 13, 2006 states, quote, for detailed skeletal analysis, refer to report by Leslie Eisenberg, PhD, forensic anthropologist, end quote. However, the clerk states that there appears to be no such report by Eisenberg in the file. I don't recall seeing any mention of report by Steer on the burn pit remains. So did they remove the report because it was so obviously a fabricated lie? Or was there never a report in the first place? I mean, you never know. I mean, this is such a mishmash of incompetence and corruption, it's hard to make heads or tails of any of it. Later finding of lead fragment back by Highway MM. Your complainant further bases this complaint upon the reports of Lieutenant Jeff Parker, Conservation Water Supervisor William Schwengel, and Recreational Safety Warden William Yearman, copies of which are attached hereto and incorporated herein collectively as Exhibit 30. Said reports indicate that on January 20th, 2006, a search was done of a rectangular area immediately west of Rogers Creek Road where the skull fragments and other body material referred to above have been found. At approximately 12:12 p.m. on said date, Warden Yearman remarked that they had located a shotgun slug. Lieutenant Parker took possession of the slug, the entire grid was searched, and no other slugs or bullets were located. Later finding of body parts at Riverbank. Clark County Clerk states there's nothing on file about the discovery or testing of the torso, which intact fetus inside and a jaw fragment from March 28, 2006 from the Chippewa River. She stated she thinks this may be because the case didn't go into trial. Media reports from April-May state that these remains are confirmed as Christine Rudy due to a tattoo and by dentist Donald Simley. You might recognize the name from the Avery trial, while also stating DNA confirmation is still pending. Very, very interesting. So basically, when they were caught red-faced lying about everything, all this fake evidence, these fake burn remains, fake bones, fake brain matter, feigned tissue, all of it's fake. So when they find the real body, all of a sudden there's no more testing? You cannot make this stuff up. I mean, I don't know what else to say. Like, this is all so obvious. I mean, it was already obvious, but I mean, if it's not obvious by now, I mean, how far into the sand must a guilter stick their head in order to ignore all of this precedent? So it's basically the same MO as the Stephen Avery case with Hallback. So if people are thinking they wouldn't, that Wisconsin officials, law enforcement in Wisconsin, crime lab technicians in Wisconsin would not completely lie and fabricate evidence. I mean, here we have a case where it's almost the exact same MO. Now, again, regardless of who's innocent or guilty, they're clearly fabricating all this evidence. So the guilter claim there'd have to be too many people in on it. Well, again, that's already been obviously coincidence. Theorists don't understand how conspiracies work. They're not in on it. They're all following orders. So it's only a couple people that devise this criminal plot. Everyone else just goes along with it because they really think the guy's guilty. And in this case, it seems like he is. It seems like Rudy is. So I guess in their minds, they can justify all of this fabrication, planting, and lying. So again, to all of the cognitive dissonant, silly, goofy guilters who think that they wouldn't do this for Stephen Avery, now, as far as I know, Rudy did not have a $36 million lawsuit pending. Not exonerated from being framed previously, and yet Avery was. So if they did all of this, so if they did this for someone like Rudy, why you think they wouldn't? Who thinks they wouldn't do it for someone like Avery? Who, I mean, they have people coming out of retirement for the latest Avery frame up. So again, whether Avery's guilty or innocent, let's put that aside for a moment. We have clear precedent, almost identical MO to fabricating, planting evidence, and lying by a lot of the exact same individuals. I mean, we don't even have to pretend, we don't even have to say, well, this other state crime lab technician did this, or this other anthropologist did this and lied. No, no, no. It was Leslie Eisenberg in both cases. So again, the guilters might find this incredibly triggering. They probably won't even be able to make it through this episode because all of these individuals, their credibility is shot for anybody who thought they had it in the first place. And we have here the exact MO of frame up and fabrication, regardless of innocent or guilty. I mean, Rudy appears to be guilty, so he admitted it. There was no official trial, but there would have been a lot of problems if they had gone to trial, wouldn't there have been? If he had actually wanted a trial, being guilty, because he admitted it, let's say he did it. I haven't looked at the case closely. I don't know. It seems like there's really nothing pointing away from that because if he told them where the body was, exactly how he did it, there's another witness at play here who was actually present at the exact moment. She appears to not be coerced. So I don't know. This is all really, really rough. I mean, there's people that knew them and also testified to this love triangle. So there seems to be a lot of evidence here that's not present in the Avery case. But the guy's guilty, but if he had wanted to go to trial, how would they have explained all of this? I mean, it's crazy. It's madness. Mind-shocking madness. So someone here also, SBR H33 here, responded with this. What I find extremely interesting is the timing of Rudy's death and the players involved in making the determination of the deceased, Rudy. Eisenberg botched her analysis of Rudy's fetus by millions of light years. There was never a fetus in the burn pit, yet she put her name on that finding. Whoops! Now to summarize some of the content I pulled from the Rudy criminal complaint, sickening feeling developed in the pit of my stomach. Suppose, if you will, that the Wisconsin State Crime Lab and the prosecution had used some of Rudy's remains to frame Avery for the Hallback murder that could have or may not ever have happened. The fact is that there are seemingly eerily resemblances to the evidence collected at the gravel pits and the Avery salvage yard. Pink tissue found on one of the gravel piles, pelvic bones found with cut marks visible on the bones, cranial pieces with radio-opaque particles present, gunshot, Hallback Rudy killed by suspected gunshot, Rudy's macabre roadside demise fully documented, photographically and properly processed, while not a scintilla of protocol was followed on the Avery salvage yard. The fact that the alleged Hallback evidence and the Rudy evidence was all neatly stored and scrutinized by Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory during the exact same time frames. The use of pap smears as an identifying marker for the deceased, SADCI Heimerl, was present at both the Rudy and Avery burn pits. Final specimen radiograph is designated AK. This consists of a fragment of skull bone measuring 6.3 by 3.8 centimeters. Also present are some possible coniferous needles or similar type of plant debris. There does appear to be some soft tissue adherent to this portion of bone. It appears consistent with occipital bone. However, for definitive anatomical designation, refer to the forensic anthropological report. Radiographic appearance of this. It is also variable dense and without definitive fragments of bullet. The fact that keys, garnets, zippers, and clasps, along with a burned cell phone, were found in the Rudy burn pit. Of course, I am thinking out of the box here, but it would be freaking amazing if we really did have it all completely wrong. And this last gem from Eisenberg regarding the burn pit where the bone fragments were located in the Rudy case. Given the shallow depth of the burn pile and the meager representation of adult human bone from that context, I believe that another or other dump deposition location may yield additional adult bone human remains. I understand, based on a conversation with Lieutenant Jeff Parker of the Clark County Sheriff's Department on January 5, 2006, that there may in fact be a second discovery location under investigation. Now, Eisenberg boldly stated that in Avery's case, the bones were not removed from his pit, nor were they brought to his pit. Yet the bones allegedly found in Avery's pit were said to have been found in a pile on top of the crusted earth in plain view, and that other cremains were found in 2 other locations, the gravel pit and Dassey's burn barrel. How does she get away with this stuff? Total nonsensical quackery. And of course, even just on a basic level, again, unless Stephen Avery has multiple personalities, some of them possibly psychic, some of them want to get him caught, some of them don't. Why? It just doesn't make any logical sense. He's going to burn her in the burn pit, take her elsewhere, burn her there too, sprinkle her remains in the Manitoba County burn pit all over Redon's, and then try to frame his sister, all while leaving remains in his own burn pit as well. I mean, how does that make any sense? It's just, I mean, even from the get-go, it's just, it doesn't make any logical sense. It's like a common sense test for adults. So it would be interesting if the FBI did an analysis between the Hallback remains and the Christine Rudy remains, because it would be quite interesting to see what they said. And of course, they could have made some swap-aroos regarding the buccal swabs, because supposedly they took buccal swabs from Christine Rudy's mother and then also Karen Hallback, Teresa Hallback's mother. Could they have swapped them? How easy is it? And of course, I'll be doing an episode dedicated on crime lab corruption, but most corruption takes place in the crime lab, just switching labels, because it's that easy. You only need 1 or 2 people in on it. Order comes in, boom, order is executed. Nobody asks any questions. Why would anybody assume labels were switched? So, just... So it's really interesting. And all of these buccal swabs and all of this data and remains are all in the state crime lab at the same time. So we know this. So again, motive means opportunity. It's all there. Whether or not they did it or not, that's separate. But motive means opportunity, all there. And then, of course, this is from jury trial transcript, day 14, March 1st, 2007, from the Avery trial, which you can find all these documents, of course, at StephenAveryCase.org. Attorney Fallon says, yes, thank you, Judge. The parties are agreed that bone fragments identified as human from the burn pit behind Stephen Avery's garage, bone fragments identified as human from burn barrel number 2 behind the residence of Barb Janda, and bone fragments suspected as possible human bones from the quarry pile in the Redon gravel pit south of the Avery salvage yard were sent to the FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia on November 2nd, 2006, November 7th, 2006, and December 19th, 2006 to attempt further DNA analysis. If called to testify, Dr. Leslie McCurdy of the FBI DNA Analysis Unit would testify that due to the condition of the submitted bone fragments, no DNA examinations could be conducted. Now, I don't know in what universe you can prove that these are the alleged victims' bones if you can't even do DNA examination on them. But the guilters maintain a nothing to see here attitude, all quite amusing. So again, we don't know what materials these were. So they were unidentified pieces of material that Sherry sampled. So I don't know. I don't know what this all means. This is madness. Someone, Veritas, also dug this up. He posted this on Twitter, November 16th, 2019. Anyone know why Deputy Reimer would be at Teresa's house in the middle of the night, 2:30 a.m. on November 7th, then went straight to Avery Salvage Yard, then headquarters at 4 a.m.? Did he bring something to Avery salvage yard from her house? No mention of him going to her house on his November 7th report, and yet in the logs here, he is at her house. Very interesting. Very interesting indeed. And yet, the guilters maintain nothing to see here. What's also strange is in the trial, apparently, Kratz stated that they had Teresa Hallback's Pap smear sample and that there was 100% certainty that the leg bone matches the blood, matches the soda can. 100% certainty that the human remains are those of Teresa Hallback. And yet, it looks like the defense agreed to a stipulation that authentication would not be required for this sample. I don't know, it's all quite weird, but even if it was her Pap smear sample and they do have her DNA, that's still going back and forth with switching labels. I mean, it's all a big mess. It's all a really, really big mess. So here's a write-up I found. So let's look at the timeline in the Hallback and Rudy cases. So this is the day before the bones were allegedly found on the Avery salvage yard. November 7th, 2005. There's an early morning arson at Lake Park Pub. CASO Deputy Rick Reimer, assigned as evidence technician. And this is in the CASO dispatch transmissions. November 7th, 2005, 12:18 a.m. to 11:38 p.m. He's processing evidence from both the Avery case and the arson case in the evidence processing room. Interesting. November 7th, 2005, also the date that the sifting begins on burn barrels taken into custody in Teresa Hallback's case. November 8th, 2005, investigators first discover what they identify as charred human bone fragments at the Avery property. They collect what they identify as charred bone evidence from Avery's fire pit. November 10th, 2005, DCI agent with Arson Bureau Rodney Pavito re-examines debris purportedly from Avery's fire pit, this is 7928, the brown tarp, and collects 2 pieces of apparently charred material, golf ball in size, property tag 7926, which cannot be the tibia bone, which is exhibit 385. November 10th, 2005, Reimer takes 7926, 2 pieces of charred material from Pavito at CASO and hand delivers it to DCI agent James Holmes at Avery Salvage Yard. None of the evidence collected on November 10th, 2005 was turned into CASO. Rather, it was turned over to Holmes, the only person with the keys to the burn barrel evidence. November 11th, 2005, on a gravel road in a forested area near Stanley, Wisconsin, Christine Rudy's husband shoots her in the head with a 12-gauge shotgun. Law enforcement reported she was killed on November 12th, 2005, but she was killed on November 11th, 2005, and law enforcement found cranial bones and tissue on November 15th, 2005 or earlier. November 12th, 2005, in the morning, DCI arson team headed by Pavito collects burned garbage from the deer camp. Also that day, Holmes brings 7964, 1 shaft fragment with cut marks, per Eisenberg, to Avery Salvage Yard and gives it to Reimer. From where this bone was recovered is not documented by CASO, but law enforcement found bones in various locations in the gravel pit on November 9, 2005. November 12, 2005, Reimer gives 7964 to CASO evidence technician Jeremy Hawkins. Hawkins moved 7964 from outside secure storage to evidence locker. November 15, 2005, Eisenberg receives 7926, human tissue and bone fragments, represented to be the 2 pieces of charred material recovered by Pavito during a re-examination of the brown tarp 7923, contents of Avery Burn Pit. November 16, 2005, communication regarding Q1, Q2, and KS1 is received by the FBI. November 17, 2005, Dr. Michael Steeder receives skull bones to autopsy in Teresa Halbach's case. These would be the cranial pieces and brain tissue from Christine Rudy's murder scene, which have yet to be taken into Queso's custody at this point. November 17, 2005, Fassbender makes first attempt to get Teresa Halbach's pap smear sometime between the 17th and the 23rd. Tom Fassbender picks it up and turns them over to Holmes for his subsequent transfer to the WSCL. November 18, 2005, Eisenberg sends 7926 human tissue and bone fragments to the FBI for mitochondrial DNA testing. November 23, 2005, 9:31 a.m., DCI agent James C. Holmes submits item EF pap smear to the Wisconsin State Crime Lab. This would be the item that Culhane purportedly used to determine the bones belonged to Teresa. And of course, there's no chain of custody that shows that this pap smear is indeed Teresa Halbach's. November 23, 2005, FBI lab report to Mullen says Q1 charred remains purportedly from 7926 was received. This cover of communications is dated November 16, 2005, one day after Eisenberg received 7926. This would be the FBI testing Christine Rudy's remains in Teresa Halbach's case. Again, this is all theoretical using this timeline, since we don't actually know what's what if they switched labels. November 29, 2005, news media reports that investigators found cranial pieces and brain tissue at the scene of Christine Rudy's shooting. Law enforcement reported she was killed on the 12th, but she was killed on the 11th, and they found these specimens on the 15th or earlier. December 2nd, 2005, about 1 week after Fassbender picks up Halbach's pap smear slides for Holmes' ultimate discovery to the Wisconsin State Crime Lab, investigators from Clark County deliver Christine Rudy's pap smear slides directly to the Wisconsin State Crime Lab. What a coincidence! December 5th, 2005, 3 days after the Wisconsin State Crime Lab received Christine Rudy's pap smear slides, Culhane issues her report, Exhibit 312, on a partial match for item BZ and a full DNA profile developed from the pap smear slide, purportedly from Teresa Halbach. Someone gave her an item BZ to test, but it isn't clear from whom she received it and where it came from. We know that Holmes had in his possession at the same time tag 7926 and 7964, so he must be the person who gave Culhane Christine Rudy's pap smear and cranial pieces and brain tissue from Christine's murder scene to test in Teresa Halbach's case, if Culhane actually tested anything at all. December 8, 2005, Dr. Steer assessed some bones in Christine Rudy's case that Eisenberg had previously identified as human skull. Steer did not confirm them as human or as anything any radiopaque lead under X-ray, although he did say they were most consistent with a human skull. January 2nd, 2006, Clark County Sheriff's Deputy Kerry Kern reports on collecting buccal swabs from Christine Rudy's mother and father and says he delivered them to the Wisconsin State Crime Lab. January 17, 2006, FBI reports to Mullen, Milwaukee Squad 6, on mitochondrial analysis for Q1, purportedly 7926, and says Teresa Halbach cannot be excluded as the source of the Q1 charred remains. November 17th, Hawkins releases 7964 to Barry Ehrman, Dane County Coroner's Office. Also that day, Leslie Eisenberg receives 7964. She eventually photographs it, Exhibit 385. One shaft fragment with cut marks, purportedly from burn barrel number 2, item 643. Now we have from January 17, 2006 to November 2nd, 2006, missing chain of custody for 7964. There's 10 months of missing custody here. Nothing to see here. February 3rd, 2006, Clark County Sheriff's Office contacts FBI Milwaukee Division at La Crosse requesting assistance in Christine Rudy's case. February 8th, 2006, Clark County Sheriff's Office collects DNA from Christine Rudy's mother and father for the National Missing Persons DNA Database because the entire skeleton hasn't been found, according to law enforcement. DNA already had been collected from her parents on January 2nd, 2006. February 15th, 2006, Holmes submits 2 items, EJ and EK, cranial pieces to Wisconsin State Crime Lab in Teresa Hallback's case. How did Holmes get these cranial pieces, and when, and from whom? Was it a children's board game from the 90s? Was it some random biology classroom skeleton and they just said it was human? I mean, we don't know any information here. February 18th, 2006, Weigert, along with Dietering, visits Karen Hallback and asks her if she has any deceased female relatives. She told them that her mother was alive but ill and that she doesn't have any nieces that are deceased, and she only had one aunt who was deceased. February 20th, 2006, FBI agent Mullen transfers buccal swab identified as Karen Hallback's to queso evidence technician Hawkins. There is no documentation for the collection of swabs because the buccal swab sent to the FBI lab for Hallback's case came from Christine Rudy's mother on January 2nd, 2006, and the buccal swab taken in custody at queso came from Rudy's mother on February 8th, 2006. March 29, 2006, law enforcement reports to the media that they have found Christine Rudy's torso and partial lower jaw fragment with teeth. Her head, arms, and lower legs were missing. May 23, 2006, Dr. Steer performs autopsy on cranial pieces in Teresa Hallback's case. Why didn't he do the autopsy on November 17, 2005? And where is the chain of custody for these specimens between November 17, 2005 and May 23, 2006? May 25, 2006, cranial pieces 9597 and 9598 are first taken into queso's custody and placed into secure storage. Wisconsin State Crime Lab to Wendy Baldwin to Jeremy Hawkins, queso evidence technician. July 18, 2006, communication about buccal swabs from Christine Rudy's parents having been acquired from Clark County Sheriff's Office, owning office, listed as Milwaukee. Agent in FBI's Milwaukee division at La Crosse took possession of buccal swab from Clark County Sheriff's Office and was notified that Eisenberg had bone fragments for submission in the case, but she would not obtain possession of the bone fragments until August 9, 2006. August 9, 2006, FBI's Milwaukee division at La Crosse receives from Clark County Sheriff's Office suspected fetal long bone fragment with 4 unattached slivers of immature human bone plus suspected adult fragment in Christine Rudy's case. Requests that FBI DNA Analysis Unit 2 perform mitochondrial DNA and nuclear DNA analysis of these bone fragments, quote, from the burn pile, end quote, in Christine Rudy's case, which they obtained from Eisenberg. Can we trust Eisenberg? FBI field office also received buccal swabs from Rudy's parents. Okay. August 10th, 2006, communication from FBI's Milwaukee division at La Crosse to FBI DNA Analysis Unit 2. FBI's Milwaukee division at La Crosse gives bone fragments from a burn pile in Christine Rudy's case to Eisenberg. September 7, 2006, FBI DNA Analysis Unit 1 receives buccal swabs from Christine Rudy's parents and bone fragments in her case. September 12, 2006, FBI DNA Analysis Unit 2 receives from the Milwaukee Division Squad 6 La Crosse Resident Agency lower leg section with tissue from Christine Rudy's body. This is the FBI unit that performed the testing for Teresa Hallback's case. Why would Christine Rudy's lower leg section with tissue be sent to both Unit 1 on September 13, 2006 and Unit 2 on September 12? September 13th, FBI DNA Analysis Unit 1 receives the lower leg section from Christine Rudy's body. When and where did they find this lower leg section of her body? Apparently, tissue from one of Christine's lower legs was tested by the FBI rather than the cranial pieces and brain tissue discovered at her murder scene, since these specimens were given to the FBI for testing in Teresa Halbach's case. Now, before I finish this timeline, that's a very interesting theory here, because the FBI would not need to be in on any conspiracy if they're receiving certain samples labeled in a certain fashion. Because we know all of this information is at the Wisconsin State Crime Lab at the same time. A lot of the same individuals are handling this evidence. So if they give it to FBI stating it's XYZ when it's actually ABC, Rudy versus Halbach, Halbach versus Rudy, the FBI does whatever test they do, they send it back. Why would they assume the Wisconsin State Crime Lab is trying to commit any kind of corruption, acts of corruption or conspiracy? Do they naturally just assume that? Of course not. These are just people doing their jobs. They receive samples, they test. October 2nd, 2006, first entry into CASO custody from FBI agent Gerald Mullen for property tag 7839. 2 paper bags containing unidentified material and buccal swab standards from Karen Halbach and 7940, 2 extracted tubes. October 23, 2006, Hawkins releases cranial pieces 9597 and 9598 to Weigert for transfer to Dane County Medical Examiner. October 24, 2006, Weigert transfers cranial pieces 9597, 9598 to Dane County Medical Examiner's office. Eisenberg's reports indicate that she did not receive 9597 and 9598 on this day or any other day. October 24th, 2006, Eisenberg receives 8314. Contents of barrel number 2, item 643, possible calcined human bone fragment. Not diagnostic. Tag 8314 identified as contents of Janda's burn barrel number 2. If you haven't checked out the Burn Barrels podcast on MINDSHOCK, check those out for the barrel switcheroo issues. October 30th, 2006, bones submitted to FBI lab for testing in Christine Rudy's case. This would be the cranial pieces that Weigert received on October 24th, 2006 for Teresa Halbach's case, but which he never transferred to Eisenberg at the Dane County morgue. November 1st, 2006, FBI lab contacts FBI's Milwaukee division at La Crosse to inform them that because the burns are so badly burnt, they hadn't had much success in obtaining DNA from bones submitted in Christine Rudy's case. November 2nd, 2006, communication sent to FBI DNA Analysis Unit 2, cranial pieces 9597 and 9598. November 7th, 2006, communication sent to FBI DNA Analysis Unit 2, Eisenberg sends 7964 to FBI 10 months after receiving it. November 8th, 2006, FBI DNA Analysis Unit 2 receives Q11 and Q12 cranial pieces 9597 and 9598. November 14th, 2006, FBI DNA Analysis Unit 2 receives Q13 and Q14 through Q14.8 bone fragments tag 7964 sent by Eisenberg on November 7th, 2006. Quite slow mail system. Okay. December 4th, 2006, FBI DNA Analysis Unit 2 receives 2 tubes for K2, buccal swabs from Christine Rudy's mother, from Milwaukee field office. Unit 2 is the unit that performed the testing in Teresa Halbach's case. Unknown date in December 2006, FBI seems to have returned 7964 to Dane County Coroner's Office. December 11th, 2006, John Wysocki, Dane County Coroner's Office, returns cranial pieces 9597 and 9598 to CASO's custody. December 11th, 2006 to January 31st, 2007, missing chain of custody for who took 9597 and 9598 out of custody and when this occurred. Vysotsky is on ledger as having returned the items on December 11, 2006, yet Gerald Mullen reportedly returned 9597 and 9598 to Queso's custody 6 weeks later on January 31st, 2007. Where was this item between December 11th and January 31st? A lot of unknowns regarding all of these same entities. December 18th, 2006, Hawkins releases 7964 to Mullen for FBI testing again. December 19th, 2006, communication sent to FBI DNA Analysis Unit 2. December 21st, 2006, Kratz faxed an FBI report to Strang and Buting on January 29th, 2007, stating the report was dated January 12th, 2007, but it was dated January 21st, 2006. He faxed only the DNA portion, leaving out the actual FTU report. This was the second fax received from the FBI and not the original that Weigert received. So they were hiding an FBI FTU report of tool marking cuts or gunshot wounds. And it's no surprise that Kratz can't even keep his dates straight. If we're pretending he's not corrupt, can someone who can't even keep their dates? I mean, they really picked the label special for special prosecutor quite accurately. December 27, 2006, FBI receives Q15 through Q45. January 23, 2007, FBI reports on solid phase double antibody radioimmunoassay examination in Christine Rudy's case. January 26, 2007, FBI lab receives possible fetal bone and adult fragment in Christine Rudy's case. February 21st, 2007, Hawkins releases 7926 to Weigert for safekeeping. This item has no record of ever having been taken into custody at Queso. It was given to DCI agent Holmes on November 20th, 2005, and then Weigert returned it to Hawkins on the same day. Very interesting. February 23rd, 2007, Hawkins again releases 7926 to Weigert, this time for court. The day Culhane testifies, and then Weigert returns it to Hawkins on the same day. February 23rd, 2007, BZ, represented to be 7926, was refrigerated by Hawkins in Queso custody after it went to court for Culhane's testimony. In Queso report page 211, it stated that it was sifted from the brown tarp number 7923 at Queso's back garage, but the burn pit evidence is simply a falsified paper trail. March 13, 2007, FBI Milwaukee Division receives lab results from Microanalytica of Miami, Florida in Rudy's case. Report dated March 7th, 2007. Suspected fetal burns from burn pit in Christine Rudy's case appear to be animal in nature, not human, and no result could be reported for the highly charged suspected adult bone. Okay. Was there an internal review of Eisenberg? May 30th, 2007, DCI submits more bones in the Christine Rudy case to FBI Squad 6 La Crosse looking for an additional victim. August 21st, 2007, FBI DNA Analysis Unit 1 reports to FBI Squad 6 La Crosse on nuclear DNA analysis in Christine Rudy's case. Victim's lower leg section matched the buccal swabs of her parents. September 4th, 2007, FBI Laboratory in Quantico sends communication to FBI Field Office, Milwaukee Division in La Crosse, requesting the closing of the Rudy file and advises that lower leg section would be returned to redacted since he submitted the evidence. January 7, 2008, FBI sends communication to FBI's Milwaukee Division Evidence Control Technician regarding return of lower leg section in Christine Rudy's case. January 14, 2008, FBI returns to Clark County Sheriff's Office the buccal swabs and bone fragments in Christine Rudy's case. May 13th, 2008, FBI completes final testing, nuclear DNA, and closes Christine Rudy's case. September 20th, 2011, Hawkins releases 7964 to Weigert. April 1st, 2019, Wisconsin Attorney General claims that Culhane's item BZ is a thigh bone. This is a problem because saying it's a thigh bone rather than a lower leg bone is in direct contrast to trial testimony where it was claimed that BZ was a tibia bone, also described as a shin bone and a lower long bone. Again, this is Kratz at trial, page 77, that we aren't just looking at some bone in abstract. We're not looking at some DNA profile. It's Teresa Halbach's shin bone. All right, it's Karen Halbach's daughter's tibia. And attached to Teresa Halbach's tibia was some tissue. Now, despite Mr. Avery, the evidence will show that despite Mr. Avery's effort to completely obliterate all these bones by burning, to incinerate these bones completely, this bone survived. This tissue that was on the bone survived, which allowed a DNA match, which allowed the state of Wisconsin analyst, guess who? Sherry Culhane. He said, guess who? Wow, what a goof. This is like a guess who game. Guess who's incompetent and corrupt? Almost all the players. Okay, so that's interesting because the Wisconsin Attorney General in 2019 said it was a thigh bone. And Gerald Mullen retired from the FBI in October 2017 and is now a compliance officer with the Wisconsin Department of Justice. Man, so did they have an FBI agent on the take? And was that Mullen? Was he related to some of these other state officials in Wisconsin? Is that what all this funny business is? Very, very bizarre. He does indeed seem to be from the area. He went to Chippewa Valley Technical College from 87 to 89, then the FBI National Academy for Education. He also worked at the Clark County Sheriff's Department and as a chief deputy. So the remains, the alleged remains here, if they are... So again, we can't really trust any of these individuals' competency or integrity in upholding the law and procedure. So that's been clearly established here. Now, what hasn't been established is exactly what happened in both of these cases. So it's just such a disturbing case because Christine Rudy, when her husband actually left her at the side of the road, she walked this great distance to a church, and in the cold, she was wearing either a light jacket or a hoodie, light tennis shoes, no gloves. She was crying in the church, and the mayor, Richard Rogers of Fenimore, actually asked her if there was something he could do for her, and she just said, "My husband is going to pick me up." And then she's dead. And so these fragments, if these are hers, they do seem to be scattered about. And I don't know how reliable this 18-year-old witness is. Does she have a reason to lie? I don't know. If she was on methamphetamines as well, we really don't know. But she stated that Christine Rudy's remains were put in a container, placed in a minivan. Container was held upright in the van by lodging hay bales around it. After driving the witness to various locations in and around Cornell, investigators did in fact locate an area on the Cobbin Bridge, which the witness indicated might be the place the body was dumped. At that location, investigators located an inordinate amount of hay at a location on the bridge, which corroborates the witness's story. However, no evidence has ever been found suggesting that Christine Rudy's remains were disposed of in the Chippewa River. From WEAU News, March 29, 2006, the search appears to be over for the body of Christine Rudy. Chippewa County Sheriff Department investigators say they found the murdered pregnant woman's body and bone fragments Tuesday afternoon near the Cobbin Bridge. Sheriff's deputies in Chippewa County got a report from a neighbor that there were human bone fragments out near the bridge. Investigators responded Tuesday and pulled the body just before 1 in the afternoon. We searched the area of the Cobbin Bridge North, said Sheriff Doug Ellis, where the body was discovered at the bottom of the embankment. This probably puts an end to the search for Christine Rudy's body, which started in the area in January. That's when a witness told police she saw Christine's husband, Sean Rudy, shoot Christine, chop up her body, and throw it over the bridge. Sheriff Ellis says his deputies will be back out at the Cobbin Bridge once more after the ice melts, and it's safe for investigators to follow up. He says he's not sure about the condition of the body right now. The remains are on their way to the Madison State Crime Lab for an autopsy and DNA testing as the district attorney in Chippewa County considers filing charges. Sean Rudy already faces first-degree murder charges. If convicted, he could spend the rest of his life in prison. I mean, this is kind of suspect, and it's hard to trust any of these individuals or any of these reports from what we've seen, but there were a couple of articles stating that body parts were recovered. What's strange is Chippewa County Sheriff's Department and area dive and rescue teams had been searching the icy waters of the Chippewa River at the Cobbin Bridge on various locations since November, but never found a body. So did they just happen to search all the spots except for that one spot by the bridge? And it doesn't state that this witness told them that. The Chippewa County Sheriff's Department received information from a resident living near the bridge that there were some suspicious items. So there just happened to be suspicious items at that time? So according to the witness, the 18-year-old witness at the time, Heather, and supposedly all three might have been under the influence of methamphetamines. But on November 11, 2005, Sean shoots Christine in the wooded area by Roger Creek Avenue. Then roughly 12 miles away, Heather claims that her and Sean dismembered and burned the body in Stanley. I'm assuming that would be his parents' house. So this would have been after midnight on the 12th. On the 13th, Heather claims Sean dumped a garbage can of body parts over the side of the Cobbin Bridge into the Chippewa River. Yeah, I don't know what to make of it. As reported late March 2006, unnamed resident near the Cobbin Bridge reported seeing suspicious stuff. In ice by the riverbank, investigators find a torso, intact fetus inside, lower jaw fragment with teeth. They pulled the body from the riverbank and sent it to the Wisconsin State Crime Lab. Apparently, the county coroner or medical examiner was not called to the scene, and the body was not sent to the county coroner for examination. That's pretty weird. The victim's head, arms, and lower legs were missing. The torso has a tattoo. They say it means it's almost her, but they're waiting on DNA. A dentist states the latter is consistent with Christine Rudy's records. So, of course, one of the biggest issues in question is there's a ledger page that states Kevin Heimerl gave a bag with burned material to Weigert on March 1st, 2012, but it was all written by Mark Weigert. No signature of Heimerl anywhere. Heimerl was present at both the Avery and Rudy burn pits. He was with Reimer and Holmes to process the brown tarp. Okay, so yeah, and this is another Department of Justice special agent here involved in some funny business. We cannot deny that there's some serious, funny business involving both of these cases, and these remains are at the Wisconsin State Crime Lab at the same time. They're being sent to the FBI at the same time. Who knows what kind of switcheroo label games are being played. But this is all quite mind-shocking. Quite mind-shocking indeed. And if we're going to get real devious, did the Carmen Bootwell case, was that the one coincidence? But maybe it wasn't. Maybe they wanted to use that to divert attention from Christine Rudy. Because if they're using Christine Rudy's case, they're swapping the pap smear and the buccal swabs from the parents to make it look like Rudy is Hallback, so everything matches Hallback. And the Carmen Boudwell was almost a convenient plant, and the cremation, and that was just a diversion. Look at the left hand so you don't see what the right hand is doing. Is that what's going on in Corruptawalk? Listeners out there, feel free to give your input on this mind-shocking episode, possibly the most mind-shocking yet in the Stephen Avery series, and we, of course, have plenty more to come, plenty more to uncover. Again, the stack of coincidences is a mile high, and plenty more to go over, which I haven't even gone over yet. All quite mind-shocking. If you enjoy the MindShock podcast, you can donate to our PayPal, help us get out more mind-shocking episodes at faster frequencies in the multiple cases and subjects we are covering. If you like this particular podcast, hit that like button, share it across social media platforms for truth and justice to prevail in all of these wrongful conviction cases. You can check us out at Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, request, as well as code podcasters. And depending on your tier, you could be a guest on the podcast. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire, signing off.